The young man here, I've seen him before somewhere. Professor Gallia is going to present the next paper. He's the founding director of the Fire Safety Engineering Group at the University of Greenwich in London, where he's worked in the area of computational fire engineering research since 1986. Professor Gallia's personal research interests include human behaviour in emergency situations, pedestrian dynamics, evacuation, pedestrian dynamics simulation, fire dynamics, and CFD fire simulation. I'm not sure what else there is, perhaps fire resistance. You haven't done that one yet. He's author of over 200 academic and professional publications and heads the team that developed the extra suite of evacuation software and the smart fire simulation software.
Thanks very much, David. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be presenting a paper concerning the behaviour project, and we're going to be focusing on one of the data sets that we've collected, and this is the Polish data set. And I'm going to be talking about two aspects of this. One is the response time analysis we've done as part of our study on cultural influences on behaviour. And the second part of the talk is about a validation data set that we've tried to construct from this data for evacuation models. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Gary Sharp, Marcus Sauter, Stephen Deere, and Lazarus Philippidis. Stephen is here in the audience as well, if you want to speak to him too. Okay, so first off I wanted to talk a little bit about social culture and fire culture and what we mean by this, or at least what we mean by it in our project. When discussing cultures, it must be emphasised that we're not talking about individuals, but large populations. And so we're attempting to compare one distribution of behaviours with another distribution of behaviours from a different population. So we're not talking about individuals. That's very, very important. By social culture, what I mean by that is a society's shared system of beliefs, values, and attitudes which influences members of the society's perception of the world and their behavioural responses to everyday encounters and emergencies. Aspects of social culture which may differ from one society to another include the degree of physical contact between individuals, the degree of physical separation, the nature of eye contact, dress code, levels of machismo in society that's acceptable, response to authority, acceptable levels of public and private signs of emotion, and so on. All of these aspects can differ from one culture to another. And one of the interests that we had in this project was trying to determine if social culture influences the way people respond to an evacuation situation. The other type of culture that we have is the so-called fire safety culture. This is the regulatory fire safety framework which is supported by legislation, prescriptive guidance, educational efforts, performance guides, and most importantly, the enforcement that exists within a society. Now, we're not going to be talking about the fire culture, we're going to be talking about the social culture and how the social culture may influence behaviour. Clearly, fire culture may influence the evacuation, especially if your doors are locked, as in the recent disaster in Pakistan, and you don't have enforcement agencies that go around and check to see that these doors are not locked. Clearly, fire culture can influence the outcome of an evacuation. What we're talking about is social culture and how this may impact the behaviour of people during an evacuation. So how people from different cultures and societies respond to the call to evacuate and behave, how will people from different cultures and societies respond to the call to evacuate and behave during an evacuation? Most data and most experiments that are conducted in this field for human behaviour and evacuation focus on data collected in the UK, USA, Canada and Australia. And it could be argued that these are quite similar societies and quite similar cultures, broadly speaking. Remember the distribution of behaviours that we're talking about. Now, the common perception is, at least the common perception I have when I've spoken to people about this, is that differences in culture, both social and fire culture, will influence response behaviours and response times. Almost everyone says, yeah, it will have an impact. But if that's true, we're certainly not reflecting it in the way we're doing our modelling. If this is the case, and if social culture does have a huge impact on the way we respond to evacuation situations, this can have a profound impact on how we plan procedures for large-scale evacuation in different cultures and different countries. how we model human behaviour in these different countries and cultures, how applicable our modelling tools are to different societies, and the nature of the data sets that we use to quantify human behaviour and use in our engineering analysis. So if we can demonstrate culture is important, it's going to have a profound impact on how we do engineering design in, for example, Pakistan compared to the United States. But the work hasn't been done to demonstrate that, at least not in a rigorous way. Now, we're going to be focusing on the response phase behaviours. So we're not looking at the evacuation phase, it's the response phase. Now, to help us look at this and study this, we've come up with a descriptive model based on existing models of evacuation behaviour, but we've tried to refine this so it becomes a little more useful for our analysis. So what we've done is we've split the evacuation behaviour into two components, the response phase and the evacuation movement phase. And the response phase we further subcategorised into different types of behaviours. We have what we call the notification stage. We're interested in the beginning part of this, in the response phase behaviour. And we have what we call a notification stage. So after the first cues, it'll take people some time before they actually recognise that, that something's going on and they need to do something else, or they may need to do something else. We call this a notification stage. And then once they've actually disengaged and appreciated that something is going on that may need their reaction, we then have two types of stages that we call going on at the same time. A cognition stage, where people are thinking about what the heck's going on, and what we call an activity stage. And in the activity stage, the occupants are doing what we call action tasks and information tasks. They're two basic things. And all the way through the activity stage, there are cognitions going on, people are thinking about what's happening. Now, what we're trying to do is, when we're studying these different cultures, we don't simply want to measure response time, we're looking at these different components so that we can try and understand, if they are different, what is different? What's happening in the response phase that's different in these different cultures? Now, the way we've tried to do this is we've identified four different European cultures that we would like to examine and see if there are differences. And we've looked at Ostrava in the Czech Republic, Izmir in Turkey, Warsaw in Poland, and Greenwich in the UK. Four quite different cultures, and we want to see if we can determine if there are different response phase behaviours. We've identified, now obviously the response behaviour in a lecture hall is going to be different to the response phase behaviour in a high-rise building, in a shopping mall, in an underground station. So what we've tried to do is freeze out all of the variables that we think would impact response phase behaviour. So we've tried to identify the same type of structure where people are doing the same types of activities, and we've got the same type of population demographic in those structures. And the easiest structure that we came across that had all these properties were university libraries. So the buildings are quite different, but it's the same type of population demographic, same age range of people, pretty much the same gender mix, and they're doing the same type of activities in these structures. And that's why we focused on libraries. And so what we were doing is we had unannounced evacuations in each of these structures, and we collected response phase behaviours. And this is an example of some of the stuff that we were doing. So we have over here the alarm has just gone off. So the first cues have been received, and we're looking at what this chap's doing. A bit later on in the activity stage, he's disengaged from his task, he's been thinking about it, and now he's starting to do things. He's getting up, he's looking around, he's packing things up, he's going off to ask people what's going on, and then eventually he finishes the response phase, he finishes the activity stage and the cognition stage, and he begins his purposeful evacuation. Now, we've based this model on the study we did at the World Trade Center and looking at what each of the people were doing in detail during the response phase. And we've also based this model on what we found from this study, the behaviour study, where we've had detailed video analysis of what's going on. The difficulty we had in the World Trade Center's case was that we couldn't measure accurately the different times it took to do various things. And so in this study we had detailed videotape which allowed us to measure what was going on in great detail. And this is an example of the stuff that we see inside the library, the different types of rooms, the different types of activities that are going on in there, and all of the libraries that we studied, while the rooms might have been slightly different sizes, had the same sort of activity going on. Private study, working on computers, working on desktop computers, working on PCs, this sort of thing. The way we collected the data, we had, in this case, we had about 30 different cameras, video cameras, secured inside the library the night before, after midnight, put in the library so no one knew that we'd gone in there and set up the cameras, apart from the library manager. So we set up a lot of cameras all over the library, and then at some point during the day, when I chose to set the alarm off, I set the alarm off and we went to see what would happen to the people. Now this is just an example of one person here. I hope for the sound, you'll pick this up on the sound. She's working more or less on her own. The alarm will go off at time 0. It's a voice alarm, and we're watching what she's doing. Now what we gathered from the video analysis, it took her 6.2 seconds to disengage from what she was doing and begin to think what's going on. And then what she did was she did what we call 5 activity tasks and 2 information tasks. For example, she collected belongings, she picked up a bag, various things she did, and she did 5 of these types of activities, and she did 2 information tasks. She tried to acquire additional information about what's going on. She was looking around, for example. And her response time for the whole process was 27.8 seconds. This is another example here of another chap in the library. This is a different type of room, and now this guy is working on a university computer as opposed to her own laptop. All these guys are working on their own on the university computer. Now he had a quick notification time as well, 11.6 seconds to disengage and begin to look around. And what this person did was he did 10 action tasks and 5 information tasks before he engaged in the evacuation process. And so his response time in comparison is 85.6 seconds, much longer than this person, although the notification time is about the same. But the reason he's taking a lot longer is he's doing a lot more tasks. Now, what we did was we did this sort of analysis for all 192 people that we could measure in the library. And this gives you an idea of the response time distribution that we had in the library for the 192 people. From this distribution, we know about 50% of the people responded within 68 seconds. The average response time was about 70 seconds. So we're going to come back to this in a little while. When we do a breakdown of all the information from all of these people and doing the analysis of all their tasks and so on, we find that the average notification time is 8.3 seconds. So all these guys in the Polish library were disengaging very quickly from their tasks, 8.3 seconds on average. The average number of action tasks was 6.1. The average number of information tasks was 3.8. The maximum number of tasks is 13, and the maximum number of information tasks is 10. This is why you're getting the tail. People are doing a lot more things. That's why you're getting the tail. But the vast majority of people are doing a lot fewer tasks and are doing a lot fewer information tasks. The average duration of an action task, the physical doing stuff, was 6.4 seconds, and the average duration of an information task, trying to collect information, was about 6.1 seconds. And the average number of tasks in total was 9.9, whereas the maximum number of tasks, this is in your tail, was about 20. And you can see why now we're getting this long sort of tail, because of what people do. So we've done all that analysis. And we also came up with a response time, a predictive response time model, an empirical model based on the information that we've been collecting over these 4 different trials. We've come up with this empirical model based on the average duration of a notification task and the sequential nature of the action and information tasks, the fact that action and information tasks can overlap, and also that you have some period of inactivity during the action task. This is when they're doing cognitions. Okay, so they're not physically doing stuff, they're stopping and they're thinking what's going on. So if you put all that together for this distribution, we can predict that the average response time is going to be 67.8 seconds, whereas the actual average response time was 69.9. That's a pretty good prediction. We're within 3.1% of that. Now, we've applied the same formulation to all 5 libraries, all 4 libraries, and we get within, certainly for all 5, we get within 9% of the average in each case. The worst we're off is about 9%. So we've got a pretty good empirical predictive model based on how many things you're doing and the nature of the things that you're doing and how long it's going to take you to disengage from your tasks. The advantage of this thing is that if you're going to say, I'm going to put in a better information system, if you put in a better information system to inform the people what's going on, you're going to reduce the number of information tasks. And if you're going to reduce the number of information tasks, you can see how much, on average, that's going to buy you in terms of improved response time. If you put in better training and train people so that they don't collect and do all this stuff that they're doing, you're going to reduce the number of action tasks. And then you can see, well, better training, how much will that buy me in terms of reducing my response time? Okay, that's all I want to say about that for the time being. The second part of the talk goes on to talking about the validation data set. And what we did was we've collected a data set that we can use to try and validate, help us validate evacuation models. Now, due to the size of the library, we had insufficient data was collected to define a validation set encompassing the entire evacuation of the library. And so we had to reduce down the sorts of things that we were going to put in the validation data set. And basically, I just want to jump to this, diagram. The validation data set is going to be quite small. It's only going to consist of the final part of the evacuation, which we measured very accurately. And so we've measured the input, the arrival times of people into this part of the geometry, and we've measured how long it took them to get out. And so that gives us a small validation data set. Given these inputs, given the geometry, can we predict the output, which is this? So that was one aspect of the validation data set. The second part of the validation data set was we identified what we call a density box just before the final exit. And we observed and we measured over time the number of people in that box, and so we came up with a measure of the density of people in that box as a function of time. Okay, and so we could plot the measured densities, the solid line, and we could also then simulate this and see if our Exodus simulation of the density variation matched what we measured. And that's quite an important measurement, because in the literature you don't see much of this, where you're looking at predicted density variations against measured density variations in a very controlled type of experiment. These are the results for the first part of the validation. This is just the exit flow. The solid line is the exit flow measured, and the dashed line represents the maximum and minimum exit flows predicted by Exodus. And the nice thing about this is we're pretty good agreement with the overall flow, and we underestimate the total egress time by about 5.1%. So that's a pretty good representation of what's going on. Although it's a pretty small geometry, so it's not surprising that that bit's so good. But it's a validation of that part of it. The really interesting thing is doing the validation of the density as a function of time in the beginning part of the exit. Now, what we did was we ran the simulation 10 times. Every time you run the simulation, you get a slightly different result. So we've got different densities for different simulations. So this is the density from simulation 1, and this is the density from simulation 2 for the same region of space at the same time. So you need to understand, we need to look at the densities for each simulation run, and also because we've got a grid-based model, we couldn't get this area, the measurement box, exactly right. So we have two measurement boxes, one slightly smaller, 7.4% smaller, and one slightly larger, 8.6% larger. And what we wanted to do was then compare our results against the measured results. Now this is for measurement area 1, which is the area that's slightly smaller. The solid line is the measured density, and these two lines, the dotted lines, are the modelled densities, the minimum and maximum, from the minimum simulation and the maximum simulation. And what you can see is we're doing a pretty incredible job of predicting that density variation over time. I was quite surprised by this. This is the larger area, which is slightly larger. Because it's slightly larger, we get a slightly larger variation. But we're still bracketing the measured density variations reasonably well. And then in this curve, we've just got the average density variation from these 10 simulations, the average density for area 1 and the average density for area 2. And what you can see is, for the two different areas, the densities are pretty much the same, and they quite remarkably follow what was actually measured. So that was, we thought, was a nice prediction of density variation over time, which I don't believe is done very often in this field. The whole validation data set is available to be downloaded off our website. Hasn't gone up yet, but it will be, with all the information of how to specify it and all the results. So you can go away and test it on your own models as well. So just to conclude then, what we've done is we've developed a framework to enable systematic analysis of response phase behaviours, which provides us with a consistent method of characterising response phase behaviours. Not simply looking at response times, but characterising the nature of behaviours. We've also come up with the framework can be used for exploring the influences of response phase behaviour. For example, the type of environment. If you now go from a library to a shopping mall, you're going to have different sets of data coming in from notification times, average action tasks, average information tasks, and so on. You can characterise the nature of the structure and the population using these parameters, not simply by our response time, but by the characteristics of what they're doing in the response phase. We've also come up with an empirical means of predicting the average response time, which gives us a very accurate representation of the average response time. I don't have time to go through all of these bullets. Now, this sort of analysis we're now using to compare the different cultures and the response time distributions and all these other parameters in the response phase for the different cultures to determine whether culture does play a role in the response phase behaviour. And finally, we've got an evacuation validation data set, which is quite small, but it provides us with some fairly useful data for looking at density variations, predicted density variations in a measured experiment compared to simulated density variations. That data set is available, or will be available on our website, so other researchers will have access to that to use for their own model development. And finally, I'd like to thank the Polish team which was involved in doing these experiments. It was we had a lot of help from the SGSP, the Fire Brigade Training School in Poland, in Warsaw, who helped us with these experiments. It took about 30 people to run these trials and collect all the data we needed. Thank you very much.